Well, thank you for deciding to come out tonight rather than hibernating. You know, that instinct can be strong. Each time you come, you help somebody else show up, actually. Right? We co-create this. And in a way, that's the theme of my talk. I want to talk about friendship tonight. So there's a lot of uncertainty and painful changes on so many fronts, right? In so many dimensions of the world and culture. And I think on one hand, one of the core gifts of Zen training is things that I'm talking about and other teachers are regularly addressing, things like deepening your tolerance for uncertainty, your ability to hold a space of not knowing, your ability to hold a space of responsiveness, right? Your ability to remain buoyant, responsive, even when you don't know what's happening. And we could also say a core gift of Zen training is change tolerance. Right? It's like you train on this most elemental level with being with just how much flow you are, and that translates to more peace, more okayness, maybe even seeing the beauty in how much flow the world is. And that is greatly supported by, or perhaps even made possible at all by, friendship. So when I think of, one of my hobbies is dystopic science fiction and other things like that. I love it. And I realize it's a kind of therapy. It's like you watch the absolute worst that could happen, and it's like, oh, this administration's not that bad. Just watch an episode of The Last of Us. That's one of my... Where was I going with that? So, things could, in our lifetime, change radically, depending on where we sit, our perspective, our intersection, our privilege, our practice. That could be not so bad, that could be really bad. Right? We don't really know. And some people think, oh, it could get really bad, I should build a bunker. Oh, it should get really bad, I should, I was imagining that Elon Musk probably has some giant cool robot with weapons all over it in his living room. Probably. But actually, or many people, in fact, most people that I know, most people think that the thing that is going to lend me well-being when things get really difficult is to have a lot of money in the bank, which is not actually true, because all of that can get disrupted. All of that can get taken away. I believe that the best investment is friendship. So money might help you in the coming worlds, but it might not. But I'm pretty confident that it's a wise investment to put our energy and care into each other, into symbiotic relationships. And in some sense, what's the point of this practice if we're not embodying friendship? If it just makes you content to cut off the world and be a peacenik in your apartment, one could rightly ask, what is this all about? If it actually leads to disconnection, if it doesn't empower this dimension. So in some sense, I want to entertain the view that the point or the fruition of this practice is embodying the state of friendship. And you could be in the practice of friendship with your family, with your coworkers, with your neighbors, with your lovers, with your what you call friends. Right? I'm not making like a distinction between friend and family. So there is a traditional breakdown of the elements of practice. It's called like the three trainings: meditation, insight, and precepts, right? And that was originally the precepts of those who were ordained in the Buddhist order, but we could think of that third category as integrity as lay people. Right? So we train in meditation, in the ability to rest our mind, right? To have more sovereignty over our attention. We train in looking into that mind and even deeper, the nature of reality itself. That's insight. And then we train in integrity. So the more that your mind is at rest, the less noise it has, the more ability you have to accept different kinds of people. Right? Sometimes I say, I can't live this all the time, but I can say it at least. As a practitioner, the only difficult person is you. That's a kind of a statement of like ultimate truth. The only difficult person is you. Because if not for what happens in our minds, a person is they're just going off, doing what they are. They're just a flower going off. They're just blooming as that being. It's just exactly what it is. And if it's difficult, that resides here. And maybe other people agree with me that that's a difficult flower. That means that there's three of us who are difficult. So the less the mind is bogged down by fixed perceptions, impatience comes to mind for me. Impatience is one of the reasons I sometimes don't show up as good a friend as I could. And when I'm in impatience, which is just a state of mind, it's a kind of affliction, I believe that some future moment has more value than this one. Or I believe that fulfilling my desire is more important than being present with what's in front of me. And so I get in this tension called impatience, where I exist here, but I don't want to. Or this person is who exists in front of me, but I don't really want them to be the one who exists in front of me. It's like that feeling at a party where you're like, I just want to talk to the cool people. And you're like, oh no, the person who's not cool wants to talk to me. But the more you practice, the more that goes away, actually. The more these distinctions, the more these preferences go away. Now, you still have people you have affinity with. Right? Affinity is a real thing. But as the heart opens, more people are interesting. More people are naturally worthy of our attention. We don't have as much of this discrimination. I would say there's a wider amount of people we can open our heart to. It's really good if you're single, actually, and you're dating. Right? The more the mind rests in its own natural state, the more we're more free from needing to get something from other people. And they can just be what they are, and I'm less influenced by their state of mind and their emotions to bring me down, actually. Yeah. I can have empathy for a state that someone's going through. It doesn't mean I have to join it, right? I don't have to get them to be different. Not because I'm just deciding to let go of that, but because the mind is actually resting in its own nature, which is a source of simple well-being. So I'm just riffing on how meditation actually really can, and maybe someone might say should, directly empower our ability to be befriend. And insight, we start to, on the cushion, see that there isn't this fixed, rigid bone called me that everything revolves around. What we are is much more transparent and much more mysterious and much more permeated than this kind of isolated thing. Like I got this little Jogen in here somewhere. Hogan Roshi always used to say the homunculus. Nobody knows what a homunculus is except for Hogan. But then people look it up and they're like, oh yeah, I know what you mean, a homunculus. He would always say, there's no homunculus inside. There's no thing with your name that sort of exists in there as a little soul firefly. It's all happening together, right? And you're more or less tethered to this body for now. But as we practice, that softens and we resume what I like to call togetherness. You actually experience yourself as having very soft edges. You actually experience, in a way, you don't experience yourself. You're not sure what that is, and yet there's awareness. Insight can see what is in the way, getting in the way of friendship. So just now I was talking about like insight into emptiness that comes out of steady Zazen practice. But also insight is what the mind can do when it's not caught up in its own content. When the mind is not caught up in its content, it can see its content. It can shine a light on its content. We call that insight. There's different levels of this. One, I recently have been calling recognizing the crossroads of self-grasping. So, at least in my life, very often there are these times, let's say regularly, there are these times where I can default to defensiveness or protecting my time, my view, my resources, my whatever, or I could go with being more magnanimous. And it's like these little pivot points. And I mean something as simple as, your roommate says, could you do such and such? And you're about to make a white lie and go, no, I got to go catch the bus. When really you have the time to do such and such. It could be something as simple as that. And insight helps us be more honest. It stops us before we default to what every being is programmed to do, which is be self-centered. That's just the programming, basically. So insight helps us recognize the crossroads of self-grasping when we're about to go down that path. There's so many ways that can serve friendship and being a friend, right? We can see how sometimes our mind can interpret something someone says as an attack, but in a way, they're just stating their experience. There's someone in my life, if I don't say, that was a really good meal, they get very mad at me. They're not happy. So I try to focus on what was good. I'm like, the sauce was really good tonight. The water was so delicious. I love how you pour water. Integrity is not something that is culturally popular. Is that word even in the discourse of American culture? It is? Okay. Depends on what people mean by it. Integrity is the practice of the precepts. And the precepts, in a way, is a whole big subject in our practice. But basically, if we're doing Zen training, one of the things we're doing is training in being reliably warm-hearted and reliably of sober mind. Right? And I don't mean that you never have a glass of wine or you never whatever you do, but that You are reliably somebody who's not intoxicated by their reactivity, so that people know they can count on you. They can at least count on you to do your best, to show up, to be there when they need you. When I'm in really scary times in my life, those are the first people that come to my mind. The person I can call who I know is going to meet me open-heartedly, and they're going to be sober enough that they're going to be able to have access to care. I mean, think about it. Think about when you're at your most raw state or your vulnerable states, the kind of person you actually want. Well, our practice is to, as a North Star, to go towards being that person. And the mystery is the more we are that person, the more that person tends to show up in our lives. Zen practice should be a support for bringing forth our most mature and flexible self, but it doesn't happen automatically, right? Even though we might be really good at meditation and definitely know what I'm talking about when I say, selfless transparence or all these fancy things, and still we have to be choosing to step into our more mature, bigger self. A lot of things that get in the way of friendship, I see them as two people who neither wants to give in and just be the bigger person. No, you first. And so you get a stalemate. You get a stalemate in the flow of energy. You're training in Zazen to experience yourself outside of the framework of good and bad empowers you to get outside of the framework of good and bad in these kind of interpersonal situations. So you can leap out of the courtroom, I like to say. The courtroom where we decide who's right, who's wrong. We think punitively about our people in our lives. You have the ability from this training to leap out of that, but you have to want to. It doesn't actually happen automatically because we have all this habitual momentum, generally. As I think about this, I think two things are existing in a dynamic tension. One is abandon the notion of perfect selfless love. Forget the saint idea, if you can. Whether people exist that are in a state of perfect love or not, it's hard to actually know. Right? We can never experience someone else's mind. But we let go of that notion and we just do the best we can. And on the other hand, to think, I'm just going to be a friend and that's its own reward. Right? The state of deciding to show up big-hearted is the reward in the moment. If you don't get what you want, then as a practitioner you can work with, I didn't get what I wanted. You might decide that I'm not going to invest so much in this kind of person because they're ungrateful. Okay. I'm not saying that this is about letting people walk over you. But we should think of embodying open-heartedness as the reward that we get when we embody it. That's how we get out of the transactional trap of, I like what you're saying, but if I do that, people use me. But no, you are benefiting from the opportunity. People give us the opportunity to be generous, especially if they're pleasant. All the pleasant and interesting people that give us the opportunity to be generous, right? To help them. They're already giving us something just by existing, just by being the strange flower that they are. That's the way to think about it. And, nobody who's practicing insight, who's really paying attention, gets in patterns for too long where they're giving and it's not symbiotic. That's why I said we should abandon the notion of the perfect saint. It should be symbiotic. This current life culture situation is really optimized, as I feel like I need to emphasize, it's optimized for kind of withdrawal and self-cherishing in a negative way. Right? We can have relationship, we can minimize actual relationship, we can minimize actual interaction. And you could do that, it's not my business. But to step into what Zen practice is, we need a field for the expression of generosity and love and kindness. You have to have a way to do that. My flowery expression is the field for love's expression. And so sometimes I ask people, what is the field for love's expression in your life? It's not a wrong thing to think about. Oh yeah, who are the people that allow me to do that? Or what are the situations that allow me to practice that? Because they need to be there to practice it. If we don't have a field for the expression of this openness, then we are wired instinctually, and culturally it's reinforced just to kind of go back to, oh, how can I get more happy? How can I like improve this thing to get happier? Right? That's the default logic, which only works to some extent. And one understanding traditionally of the Bodhisattva path is that you get so caught up in wisely being of service in the world that you forget you had your own problems. You get so wisely caught up in loving beings, not in a kind of martyr, pleaser, codependent way, in a wise way. You get so involved in that you realize, oh, dwelling on my own predicament is actually an option to a large degree. To a large degree, I just default to, is my life what I want it to be? Is it as happy as it looks on such and such a show? Or whatever idea. We default to that because we don't know better. But in a way, that default always contains the glitch of believing that you are an actually existent being in a way that you're not. I have some particular practices I want to talk about. I think a lot of them have to do with speech. I work with couples, which is really fun to do. I'm much better at other people's relationships than my own. And I came up with this concept of vibe tending. And that is, in every friendship, relationship, maybe any interpersonal situation, a bodhisattva is doing positive vibe tending. You're monitoring the energy. Are we going downhill here? Are we sliding into pessimism? Are we shifting towards despair? Are we getting judgmental? And you're working creatively in whatever way you can to raise the vibe. In relationships, there's, has anyone heard of the Gottman Institute? Yeah, all the therapists are like, yep, heard of the Gottman Institute. Yeah. The ratio of praise, gratitude, the expression of appreciation has to exceed the complaints or your relationship's in big trouble. Is vibe tending. Right? It's artful. It's not saying that the negative things aren't there. It's just saying it's only so helpful to iterate them. Right? Vibe tending. So this is something that I think that's part of what it means to be a bodhisattva. You recognize the dead end of pessimism and despair. This is a dead end. Right? You recognize that, thinking once about the bad thing is probably enough. If you're not going to do something about it, just one thought about it is sufficient. That's not what human beings do. They tend to loop on what's bad. And make sometimes a whole personality organizes around what's wrong, what's bad. It becomes its own tunnel of reality. So vibe tending. So using speech and action to create positive energy. That is a very creative, a very joyful, a very pleasurable, and a practice that takes a lot of skill because you can't be fake about it. You can't invalidate people. right? It really is. But the good news of this is our social life is real practice. It's not like just sitting here on these cushions is the real thing and then all that is just a wash. No. So there's an old saying that a bodhisattva leaves a positive wake. Right? That means that when we're in that state of mind, when we're in our groove with that, we won't bring things down. Right? We're facing the hard facts of life and finding space within it, and so we can offer that to some degree, right? And maybe greater and greater degrees. The other element of vibe tending is, I think, and this is definitely true in my experience with working with couples, we have to learn to apologize a lot. Apology has to become reflexive. Now, I don't mean, oh, I'm sorry, I'm bad, I'm always doing the wrong thing state of mind. That's a different issue that you could bring up with your therapist. This element of vibe tending is when we, even when we hurt people, or even when they have good reason to believe that we hurt them, to say, I did that, I'm sorry. That's the meaning, in a sense, that's the interpersonal translation of these bows that we do every night. That bow is, I'm going to abandon my fixed point of view 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 100,000 times in some traditions. Right? Apology is part of vibe tending and a part of being a good friend. Right? Because we're practicing of leaping out of the courtroom of right and wrong, the prison of right and wrong. When we apologize, we're not then saying, okay, I'm now moving to the position of being the one who's wrong and you're right. That's not actually what we're doing. We're just saying the universe is made up of multi-perspectival, shape-shifting realities, and this person's reality is that I did something that was harmful. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'll never know what it's like to occupy anyone else's experience, actually. I'll never know. Right? So it's a kind of existential humility. It's one of the things I noticed about my partner is she would do things that would irritate me, but whenever she notices it, she would say, I'm sorry. I was like, wow, that's such a good quality. I think she really owns the times where she kind of, I don't know, where only the water is good. So I mean it, or it is true to me, for me, when I do my New York Times scrolling or wherever I go. I actually try to make sure I read on both sides of the political spectrum so I don't get too in my own little tunnel. I think that's a good practice. So wherever you are, think of what the mirror opposite is and read that too. See if you can take in another view. When I read those things, regardless of which side, it's often a little scary. And if I'm anxious about the state of the world, I really think, oh yeah, the best thing I can do with this energy is just deepen my friendships. I mean, so I text the person I haven't checked in about, or I think about what can I do, right, to give more fiber, more substance, put more energy into the relationships I have, right? And maybe if I have time, feed the new ones. I think that's a very wise response to the anxiety of these times. Okay. Let's see if there's if you have any thoughts about this topic. Yeah, do you mind talking into the microphone? You do that for the benefit of folks at home?
Had something come across my path of somebody saying they don't use the word hate in their house with their children. Using the word hate is a correction opportunity, but not for the kids. Because their 7-year-old asking, why don't we say that? And saying, it's really hard to come back from. And that the depth of going on about it, that you build your identity around it, maintaining that, and you cannot change it because it would require such a huge energy shift. And it was, we talk about different sides, and I was practicing that, and whoever came in actually had some people jumped in line that surprised me and wishing them actually that, because it would make us all a lot happier if they would. So I'm just curious thoughts around that.
Around what specifically? I appreciate the insight.
Trying to practice that daily.
Yeah.
It's easy to be ease. It's easy to do that.
Yeah.
And practice the acceptance of the dukkha, the suffering of the. It is, but it is not. And if you could speak to getting over that, staying in that. Constant tendency that when you have such profound fear.
Profound what?
Fear.
Fear. Well, what came up for me is, I used to think a lot of what I set up here was bullshit, even a few years into my Zen practice. And then I spent a good amount of time doing things like loving kindness practice and creating positive energy in my system. Right? And then from that state, I was able to see what everything else was differently. So I think to understand why there is a wisdom in saying I don't give any truck to thoughts of hatred. I drop like a hot potato my judgments. Some people might say, oh, that's sort of Pollyanna, or that's not really seeing things. But I think there's actually a higher wisdom that sees that training the mind in positivity is actually ultimate, is actually the wiser, is actually bigger than including my hatred and my judgment and saying, well, I'm not going to pretend that I don't contain this. We need to pretend that we don't contain it, but the state of vibrant positivity is actually wiser when it comes down to it, because it's not a matter of whether people deserve hatred or I actually feel it. It's like this mind is formless. I can use it any way. I'm habituated to using it in particular ways, and I think those ways are real. I think they're me. I think they're right. But actually, it's completely open. And so the most creative thing is just to raise the vibe. And to anybody who reacted to, oh, that kind of stuff is Pollyanna, or, that's not, easy to say, hard to do, whatever. You've got to do these practices of like loving kindness with real regularity and experience your life from that point of view. And then it makes sense. It doesn't make sense from the outside. That's what came up. I don't even know if it responded to your question.
I have a question.
Okay.
Anybody else wants to answer, welcome to take it. That flexibility. And when I'm thinking about our states, talked last week about staying in different states, and being able to recognize I'm in this state and need to shift it. That's what wasn't it.
Yeah, the flexibility. Yeah.
See if I have that thought. I was thinking of this feeling of affinity that you mentioned, and struggling sometimes with the loss of affinity, which sometimes might take the form of judgment, and then sometimes not. And that's something I struggle with in friendships sometimes.
Yeah. There have been times where what seemed clear to me is that I completed my karma with somebody. And that is, the affinity was a time when we were just moving parallel, and there was symbiosis. And then, because all things are impermanent, that came to an end. And sometimes we get so attached to just doing what we've always done that we don't want to admit that we've reached that point. And so we perform friendship still. We perform affinity. And then sometimes it's a matter of dropping down to a deeper commonality. And you have to listen for what it might be, right? What's really called for. Yeah. It's, in some sense, our culture has a lot of openness that we have this sense that we can choose our friends. I don't know if it always was like that. It used to be, I think, sort of like who's in your family and who's at your church. Like, that's your social circle. But we've kind of exploded the social potential so wide open that we feel that we get to choose, right? So then these dilemmas come in, right? And maybe a good, metric is, where's the symbiosis, and where can I be of benefit even if I don't feel like I'm getting something? Both of those are useful places to lean in from the perspective of training as bodhisattvas. Symbiosis always feels better, in the moment at least.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the positive vibe tending for a relationship where your partner deals with chronic pain. It feels like that can color many situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know what I did, or maybe just feeling the suffering of being in that kind of situation. I found that in those situations, what became the art to me was humor. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know how if you can do that, but playfulness can go a long way to even cutting through deep physical pain, giving some reprieve from it. I think we give a gift by empathizing without joining. And if someone wants us to join, then that's something they have to own, right? Misery loves company, right? But it doesn't benefit from it. And that's the other thing, is empathy without joining.
I feel like, in my experience, when I transitioned to be more masculine, I lost like a lot of friends and family and chosen family and all this stuff, and it really frightened me to ever love again, except in the maybe like, I don't know, more obviously or intensely observable, reassured connection in like a relationship, like a romantic relationship or something like that, or and I've been trying to make friends and like be like, hey, like you've invited me to this thing multiple times, and I think you're cool. Do you want to hang out or whatever? And people don't answer, or whatever. There's just like a long line of like effort and it not really happening. And then it's all been kind of settling, and I'm kind of like getting more into the groove of like just slowly building up friendships naturally and whatever, instead of being like so direct. I tend to be really direct, and hasn't gone so well on the West Coast. I'm from the East Coast. But I was just made aware of, I know this book, you probably know it too, C. Schwartz, the No Bad Parts, but also wrote a book that said You Are the One You Were Looking For, and I'm going to read that soon. And it got me writing this little back and forth with myself, like a comic between my heart and my brain, and doing some tending to affirmations and different things that I feel like I'm lacking in my life. But I feel like I really need community who's really lifting me up, especially when people like me are having a right script and whatever. So it is important to me to hear "I love you" a lot, or "Cool, I appreciate what you're doing," or whatever. But am I also digging myself a hole, expecting that or wanting that or hoping for that, if maybe it's being communicated in other ways, or just being around different people, or what have you. How do you, what are values? I value that. I value direct communication and lifting each other up and whatever else. How does one balance those values, not as expectations or as, leaping into the present and not being, leaping into the future and not being in the present with whatever connection is happening, and how to decipher, is this good or harmful, or I don't know. There's some subtle spaces to these things.
Yeah. Well, I don't pretend to have any easy answers for your dilemma. So just a few things that came up for what it's worth. I think if someone has 3 reliably good friends, that they are extremely fortunate. So when I was talking about friendship, I'm not talking about having 40 of them or even 10 of them. To have 3 really reliable good friends is a treasure. So, and that takes years often. Right? Affinity might be instant, but deep friendship takes investment over years. I think sometimes we do have seasons where we can't force our way out of a time of more solitude. It's like we want it to happen, and that desire is very natural and beautiful, but one could listen to how much power do I actually have right now, right? And if I don't have it and I'm forcing it, then maybe I can relax more into this is a time when I'm working on befriending myself and treasuring the actual friendship I do have, like you mentioned, partner. Yeah. And I think it's a sad thing to say, but I think I've lived in the last 5 years, I've lived in 4 different houses because my partner and I, we moved and we came back to Portland. And only in one place, and that was in the South. I was in Asheville, North Carolina. Only in one place were our neighbors willing to be friendly. And I think we're in a time of fear and self-centeredness. And I think we're in a time of we don't know where other people are at because of we don't know where they are ideologically, so we're kind of not sure who we can talk to about what we believe. And so there's more siloing. So I think it's harder to make friends now. It's really sad. I hope this is a space. There's at least some affinity we all have here. We came together because there's something that we, to one degree or another, believe is beautiful. So it makes it all the more, all the more beautiful. So if you're experiencing it as being difficult to make friends, I wouldn't take that as a personal shortcoming. If you're experiencing it as people can't handle being talked to directly, I wouldn't take that as a personal shortcoming. Yeah. So, my talk tonight was about how practice empowers us to be a friend, because many people could hear this and say, I just don't have the space in my mind to show up like you're talking about. And they're not lying when they say that. They don't. And we might feel like we don't at times. But the practice is going to give us the energy to show up like that eventually. So, yeah. Because the state of open-heartedness feels so right. Everybody would want to be in it if they could. If they believed in it and they had access to it, they would. That's why, we fixate on romantic love, because we idealize that in that place I can be in that thing a lot. But the truth is, you have to practice it there too. It doesn't just happen to you. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.